Howdy, everyone. All right, so unbeknownst to all of you guys, I had a whole line of convoluted, hard to understand, cobbled together videos explaining step by step how I went going about the process of building up and installing the wheel and brake assemblies onto the gear leg. I deleted all those videos, like I said, because I didn't really have my act together. They just seemed to be very chopped up and cobbled together, and I think they probably would have been a little hard to understand. So those are all gone. I'm going to start from square one on this leg. You can see this one is already built up, but I'm going to try to make this somewhat coherent so that it's easy to follow and easy to understand. The written instructions that Vans provides explaining how to install the brakes and the wheels, in my opinion, are pretty lousy. They're not that great. And the print, the print that goes along with those written instructions, in my opinion, is almost as bad. I don't think they explain things very well. The pictures on the plans, in my opinion, are not very informative. There is also, this is everything that you see is stock. This was all included in the Vans kit. I didn't buy aftermarket brakes or wheels or anything like that. So this is 100% Vans stock brakes, wheels, things of that nature. Having said that, when you do get your brake and wheel package in your kit, there is a instruction manual that comes with them. This is very, very helpful. There's some information in here that I think is critical. The Vans instructions don't say anything about this. The information that's in here, Vans does not talk about. I'll get to that when we get to that point in the build, but this is very important to make sure that you read what's in here. All right, so like I said, I've already built up this one and I've learned a lot in the process. I'm going to try to go through a step-by-step procedure on how to get everything together and have it work correctly. So the very first step is I've already talked about fitting the leg to the engine mount. Now, I've seen it done where people mount the engine mount to the airplane, and then they have the airplane raised somehow in the air, and they're trying to fit the gear legs up into the mount and everything while the fuselage is suspended or while it's braced from underneath. I am not going to do it that way. I am going to, like I've already done, fit the legs to the engine mount with everything off of the airplane. For me, I think it's just a lot easier because you can work on stuff on the bench, you can work on stuff on the floor, you work on the pieces independently, nothing is attached to the fuselage. It just seems to be a lot easier. I've already done that. I've already fit the legs to the engine mount, and I've explained how you have to clean up the powder coat to get these to fit up into the engine mount. I've already talked about how you have to clean the engine mount again for the powder coat, and you have to deburr, and that's already been explained in another video. That actually worked very well for me. It was a non-event. Everything went really smoothly once I got some of this powder coat cleaned back off. I'm going to stick to that same type of mentality when it comes to building up the gear legs. Rather than installing the engine mount onto the fuselage and then trying to fit the legs up into the mount and then trying to fit all of these wheel pieces, brake pieces, tires, tubes, bearings, and all that, rather than trying to do all that with an airplane that's jacked in the air, suspended in the air, you're working on the floor, I'd rather do all that on a bench. I've got everything laid out on my bench. If I need to use a vise, I can use a vise, whatever. I'm not cobbling around on the floor trying to get this stuff fitted. Personal preference. So I'm going to build up both gear legs completely. I'm going to install the gear legs into the engine mount. And then I'm basically going to wheel the engine mount up to the fuselage, raise the fuselage to match, and then bolt it in place. That's the plan. Okay, so engine mount, gear leg fitting is complete. Now I've got the legs individually on the bench. We're moving on the wheels and brakes. So here's what I've learned. Just like with the gear leg prep, you have these brake mounting flanges that are powder coated. These need to be cleaned up just like the gear legs. So you want to clean inside here on both sides, clean out the powder coating. You want to drill through the mounting holes to clean out the powder coating, and you want to drill through this through bolt, this single through bolt again to clean out the powder coating. You just want to do your normal cleanup, deburring, things like that to get this to fit nicely onto the axle. And again, like the written instructions had talked about when you're fitting the leg to the engine mount, these bare metal pieces on the leg and on the engine mount, they recommend you coat these with grease because they're bare metal. I am doing the same thing with my gear legs with the brake flange parts. So anywhere there's bare metal, like the inside of this flange and the axle itself, this is all going to get greased so that it won't corrode later on down the line. Prior to doing that, again, you want to take care of this part of the gear. Now, there's really not a whole lot to do here. There wasn't any powder coating or anything like that to worry about. But make sure you clean up the threads. These threads on both legs had a lot of debris and dust and crapola in them, so I cleaned the threads really well. And you want to make sure that this through hole is also cleaned out really well. These are the bolts that are used for the through hole. You just want to make sure that you can run the bolt through there nicely, and you want to be able to run the bolt through the flange nicely. So to clean everything up so this bolt will fit the way it's supposed to. We'll come back to that later as well. So that's part of the prep work. Get your flange ready to go. Get your axle cleaned and ready to go. The other thing that the instructions talk about are spacers. You have to make 3 aluminum spacers. And again, I'll get to these later on when we actually do the assembly, but these are supposed to space this mounting bracket. This mounting bracket attaches to the flange and it supports your wheel fairing, your fiberglass wheel fairing. This is the bracket for that. This needs to be spaced such that it will not interfere with the disc rotor when it's in place. That's what these spacers do. There are dimensions on the written instructions for these. They are supposed to be 13/32 of an inch long. If you do the math on that, that works out to be 0.406 inches in length. I had made these like I always do my bushings. I rough cut them, and then I chuck them up in the drill press. I spin them in the drill press, and then I bring them down onto sandpaper, and I just run the sandpaper underneath them as I'm putting a little bit of pressure down. That trues up the ends, and then you can work them down using a caliper, and you can get them exactly to your 0.406 if you want to go that far. Point is, you have to make 3 spacers. Again, that's part of the prep work that I recommend you do ahead of time, and I recommend you do both flanges, all 6 spacers, and both of your mounting brackets. These are just like all the other Vans parts. They come with the blue vinyl. They're just stamped and formed in the rough. It's up to the builder to come back and do all the edge finishing, do all the deburring, deburr the holes, things of that nature. That's all part of the prep work. The other thing is this. I noticed during the assembly of the other leg, this corner right here, this is radius so that the brake caliper can pass through here. This is not nearly done enough, so you have to clean this out. You have to make this corner bigger. And I'll try to show you that on this other leg. So here is the plate And if I get down in here, you hopefully can see. I know there's a lot of reflection. Try to get this in here. It's very hard to see, but this part of the brake caliper passes through this plate. And that corner of the plate will not allow the caliper to fit in there the way it's supposed to. So you have to make that corner bigger. You have to radius that corner so that the brake will fit through it. The best way to do that, unfortunately, is to do a partial assembly. And then you can kind of outline where you need to cut and then take it apart and then cut that corner out. And again, that's all part of the pre-assembly preparation. So that's what I'm going to have to do first. I've got this ready to go. I got my spacers made. I'm going to have to temporarily fit this stuff together on the axle so I can figure out how much to take off of this corner. The last thing that I recommend you do is pre-pack your bearings. There are 4 bearings. They're tapered bearings and they need to be packed with grease. I'm not going to do a video on that. There are plenty of YouTube videos on how to pack wheel bearings. But I recommend you do that first. So get your bearings packed, get your flanges cleaned, get your spacers made, get your wheel fairing, bracket, deburred, and cleaned up, and get your axle cleaned up and ready to go. Check your holes and make sure your bolts and everything can fit through the holes. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pre-assemble the flange, the plate, and the axle, and I'll slide my brake caliper in place and try to figure out how to get this, how much I need to cut this corner. The brake caliper comes just as you see it here. This is right out of the box. This is how it comes, minus the fitting. I'll come back to that in a minute. But this is part of what I was talking about. Needs to be radiused. This corner needs to be radiused for this to fit through it. So I'm going to dry fit these components together, and I'll show you what I'm talking about with that corner. So let me get cranking on that, and I'll come back here shortly and show you what I've got so far.